Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the lecture. We today are going to be talking about this thing called event delegation, which is really more of a technique than like a JavaScript. It's not like a JavaScript fundamental. It's more like a technique that we build on top. Did everybody like do task list or light? Yeah, yeah. That basically that thing this morning. Did everyone? What was hard about that? Anyone find anything difficult or difficult to do?
The to-do list.
Yeah, the to-do list thing.
Finding some of the elements was a bit awkward sometimes.
Okay, finding some elements is awkward. Yeah, what else?
Interaction between parents, like certain things, to like do something or the game thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so like basically the relationship between like nodes and stuff. Anything else? What particular feature did everyone find difficult? I imagine it's like the same feature. Anybody? Delete. What did you say?
Yeah. Like the joining button, like things that you create to and figuring out which place to go.
Yeah, that's in an abstracted sense, that is the problem. That is difficult, right? So it's like, yeah, in this particular lab, like the delete is hard. But yes, I think you're right that in an abstracted sense, the thing that is difficult is just sort of like once you make something, how do you then attach event listeners to it? Right, which is like difficult. And actually the purpose of that lab is actually to get you to that point and just see like, this is annoying. And like, even if you get it to work, you probably have to do some like janky stuff to get it to work. So that's actually kind of like the lead into this lecture. It's like the purpose of this is to solve for that. So what we're going to learn today is like basically solving for that problem. Like how do we actually just like locate specific things? Like how do we make things like, if we're making new things and like dynamically created on the page, like how do we then like do event listeners on those? So in order to do that, we're actually going to learn a little bit about this idea, well, this concept. This is actually a fundamental in JavaScript called event propagation, right? This is going to be an entirely new concept. It's something that you probably haven't seen in labs. We're just going to go over it from start to finish. And then we'll also sort of start to see like, okay, once we understand event propagation, we'll start to say like, okay, then how do I use conditional logic in combination with event propagation to then create what we call event delegation, right? Basically, what this will allow us to do is to create a single event handler that is not tied to a specific like to-do or whatever, and instead put it on like the parent and have the parent identify what was clicked. And that's going to be like the power of event delegation. Yes.
When you say parent, can that go all the way up to the top?
Yeah, theoretically, yes. But we won't do that. Yeah. We will also use this idea of like the data set. This isn't going to be a new concept. We'll find some uses for this, but the data set is a very powerful attribute in HTML that's good for us coders. It doesn't serve any like display purposes. It is strictly for us, as we're going to see, to store information on our HTML, right? Any questions thus far on any of these, or just any of these terms? It's okay if you don't know some of them. Obviously, we're going to go over them.
What is
It's an attribute of DOM nodes. So just like ID and class name are attributes of like an HTML element, right? Dataset, as we're going to see, is going to be available to us like on HTML and also via DOM nodes. Okay. Cool.
Is that the attribute for HTML size?
Yes, it is.
For every?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. It's actually just like generalized. It has a very general purpose, and we'll see what it is used for later, right? So one thing, let's talk a little bit about this. Like this is what we had yesterday, but I deleted all the functionality because we're going to rebuild it in like the proper way, which is using event delegation. So again, the overall goal is to when I click this like should increase, right? Let me blow this up a little bit so it's easier to see. Cool. Now, what I'm going to do here is in my JS, right? I have this basic like here's my data, here's my for each, there's my render game function. Nothing really different from yesterday. But what I'm going to do here is first I want to show you. I'm going to find this like button and attach an event listener to it, just like we did yesterday. So document.querySelector, like event listener click I'm going to add this event in, and I first want to explore the event itself, right? So I'm simply just going to console log event, just to show you, just so we can look at it, right? So when I click this like button, I expect that the event to be console logged. And it is, right? Again, this only works on the first one, which is fine, right? I only need to show you the event. But again, here's the event. The event is a special object that is passed into all callbacks that go into an event listener. So whenever you write an add event listener and you need access to the event, it should be the argument to your callback, right? Now, you'll notice there's a few things on this. Look, take a look at this. Like alt key is there. You'll have I think there's shift key, false. You'll have the client, the X. It's literally information about the event itself. Where did you click? Was the shift key held down? Was the control key held down? Was the alt key held down? And all this other sorts of information. For instance, if I actually now I'm going to hold shift and click this, and you'll notice that shift key is now true. See that? So we can actually capture stuff about this specific interaction. The relevant bit that I want to point you to is actually this thing called the target, which I've talked about yesterday. Basically, if you had to guess, what is the target on the event? I'm sorry?
The element you want to trigger.
Yeah, well, it's not the element that you want to trigger it, it's the element that did trigger it. I want to clarify that language, right? It's actually wherever it was called. In this case, it's on the button. And that makes total sense, right? Because where did I put my add event listener? On the button, right? So it makes sense that the target is the button itself, right? Pretty straightforward. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add another event listener, and I'm going to modify this console log just so we can tell. But I'm going to put this console log on. Let's leave this one here. But I'm also going to, in addition, add one to, let's say, the entire. Oh wait, it's right here. I'm going to add one also to the tile as well, right? Same deal, but this time I will console log the event, right, in both. So there is an event listener on the like button as well as the tile. So the tile is the entire thing here. And when I click it, right, makes sense. There's the tile. Here's my event. And the target is the tile. Makes sense so far? Yeah? Now my question to you is, what will happen when I click like here? I'm sorry, let's raise our hands on this one. Okay, both. Anybody else have an answer? Okay, the target's going to be the like one, but how many console logs will we see? Simon said both.
Yeah,
So
I think that is both.
Both.
The event, they will be.
Yeah, we'll take a look in a second. Anybody else have any answers? So both, yeah?
I think that will be both, but it will be two different ones.
Okay.
One's on the bottom and one's on the top.
Yeah, I think that's what they're saying, yeah.
Intuitively, it's based off of the X and Y value of where the mouse physically clicked. So in the like button and then in the tile. So you're in both.
Yeah.
Probably.
Nice, good, right? So I like that reasoning, right? The idea behind this is that the like button is inside the tile, so it's not like JavaScript is smart and knows if you're clicking on the tile or the button. It just has no idea, right? The button is in the tile, so it's just well, you have a click event handler on the tile and the button, so I'll just call it on both, right? Now, what you'll actually to the point here that's interesting to Eugenia's point is what do you think the target will be for the button? Let's say that. The button? Yep, right there. Well, what about for the tile?
It'll also be
Let's raise our hands on this one. Let's raise our hands on this one. Yeah.
I mean, it'll be the same location, X and Y values, but it won't be above.
Okay. So we'll just have the same X and Y, but not have it will be the tile, right? What did you say? You think it will still, you think it'll be the tile? Or the button?
Oh, the button.
Okay, so you think it's going to be the button?
I would say intuitively it would be tile because it's the event for the tile.
Actually, it's the button, right? So the cool thing about this that we're noticing is that like, well, actually, why don't you explain? Why did you think it was the button?
I thought it was going to be the button, like, because if you go back, my gut was that, like, for some reason, specificity or like the level, like parent-child, like I thought for some reason that would matter here, and that because it's more like not accurate or specific to indicate that the button is the one that's being is the space that's like being triggered
Yeah.
or whatever.
So what I'm
it
gonna
would keep the button in action. That's the only.
I'm gonna try to. I think I know what you're saying. I'm gonna try to distill that into like just simpler terms. It's like I clicked on the button. Doesn't matter if the event listener was on the tile or on the button itself. The thing I actually clicked on was the button, right? Like the target of my click was this DOM node. And I think in talking about specificity, what Eugenio is trying to say is that like when we click on the like button, it tries to get as specific as possible, and that is actually true. It does actually try to hone in on specifically what it is that you just clicked, right? And so the idea of that is that like the target is actually we can actually get the same target like across event listeners. We can either put the event listener on the button or on the tile, but when I click on the button, I can identify what was clicked via the target, right? Yes.
So if we click on, say, the image or the text, the target won't be the tile, it will be that image.
What do you think?
I think, yeah.
In this case, it's the image. You're right, right? So I put one event listener on the entire tile, but the cool thing is that like it activates everywhere inside of here, but I'm gonna simplify this, just console the target directly. So I put one event listener on the entire tile, but when I click on the tile, it's the tile. When I click on the H4, it's the H4. When I click on this, it's the P. When I click on this, it's the image. When I click this, it's a span, or the P. And when I click on this, it's the button, right? The idea behind this is that like whenever you click on any node, regardless of whether it has an event listener attached to it, what actually happens is this thing called bubbling, right? So when you click on something, the event it doesn't know what you're actually trying to click on. It's just like, are you clicking on the H4 or are you clicking on its parent or its parent's parent, right? Because technically all of those things are within each other. If I were to put one on the entire body, an event listener on the entire body, that would literally activate everywhere on the page. And the idea is that like whenever you click on anything, it actually knows what you're clicking on, but will trigger all events upwards, on all parents that match it. That's why it's called bubbling, because it starts at the bottom, and the event literally moves upwards through the layers and checks to see if there's an event listener that matches, and will trigger that event listener on every parent above it, right?
Based on the DOM tree.
Yes, based on the DOM tree, exactly. That whole process is called bubbling. Bubbling is also a type of what we call event propagation. The idea is that like outwards from the thing that you clicked on, the event moves upwards and outwards, right? You're not just clicking on the thing that you specifically clicked on, you're also clicking on every parent above it. Yes?
I saw a target that bubbling is, I think, a Boolean value. Is that
Mhm.
you can set it to not do that?
Yes, you can actually stop bubbling if you'd like, right? There are ways to prevent it from there's a function called stop propagation, which literally stops it from propagating. Actually, let me show you that. So right now, in the way that this is currently written, if I click this, it activates the click event handler on both the button and the tile. But there's a function called event.stop propagation. And now it only activates on the button. It literally prevents it from calling anything above it, right?
So we'll bubble.
I'm sorry,
So bubble.
there's no bubbling. That's what stop propagation does. It stops the bubbling.
Why would you want to do that?
Sometimes you don't want to trigger the parent's event listener.
I mean, it won't be doing it, just be bigger.
You'd be because like right now all our functions do is console log, but if it had more complicated activities, it might not work, right? We wouldn't want it to trigger on the parent, right? Because the console log's fine for now, but yeah.
So if your event listener on the tile was, if they click on the tile and redirect to this page,
Mhm.
but you also had on the button thing, if they click on this button, make the like, add a like. So if you click on the button without the stop propagation, it would add a like and redirect to the page.
Yes, that's right. That's exactly right. Did everyone hear that? Right. So let's say that like this thing adds a like. You know, like let's say we had the code for adding a like here. This one that's on the button adds a like, but this one, I don't know, has some code that redirects to some other page. Right? Just take that as an example. So this one's on the tile and this one's on the button. If there were no propagation, if I didn't put the stop propagation here, clicking on the button would both add a like and then redirect you to a page. It would trigger both functionalities, right? The stop propagation, though, would actually just add the like and not redirect. Does everybody see that? So that's a great example of like when you wouldn't want to trigger it, when you wouldn't want to necessarily trigger the same behavior that's on the parent as when you click on a specific child, right? So next, what's up?
So could you potentially, like, in order to make a web page interact, like, could you put an event listener on the larger, the entire page, and then like stop propagation for like various, like all the way down
Yes, you could.
for every single like part or like different parts of your page that you wanted to like listen for different things, whether it was like click on this button over here and like stop it from listening up and like doing something somewhere else on the page.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
that how, like, and why, like, but isn't that bad? Like, why to have like one catch-all sort of like event listener for every single potential thing?
Yes.
Because like, so then why, when do you know where you want your event listener to be broad, like as broad as possible versus not broad? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So I think the idea here is that like you're saying that can I just put an event listener on the entire page? And the answer is yeah, you totally can, right? I think in fact React does that. It doesn't even use real events. It uses something called a synthetic event. We're not going to talk about that. But the idea is that like that is totally a thing that you can do. The problem with that is that you have one gigantic event listener that does everything, and it's just like not great. Right? It's just like not a great thing to do. And because all your code would be in like one big function, which is just like not ideal. So Eugenia's question is basically like, at what point do you draw the line? Like, where do you actually then figure out like, how far do I go up? Can I put an event listener on the entire page? Do I put it on the entire container? Do I put it on like a specific tile over here, right? And the answer is that it kind of like, it should go as high as it needs to go. Like, I would say try to confine your functionality. Like, if I had like different types of functionality that had to do with this specific card, for instance, like if I had an X button to delete this card and a like button and a dislike button, I would probably have like one event on this entire thing to deal with that. One event listener on the entire card to potentially deal with all three, right? And every card would have one event listener, right? But if I had activities that had to do with all of the cards, right? Maybe like drag and drop, like I could take this card and drop it over there, like reorder the cards. I would probably put that on the larger container. So try to put it as high try to put it as low as you can to capture all relevant events. So it's like, if I had stuff that was specific to this tile, I would probably have one event listener for all that. But if I had like stuff like code that that needed to touch several of these tiles, I would put it on the container of that thing. What's up?
So that, like, in the example that you just gave, would you ideally potentially have two event listeners, like one to drag, like one on the entire container to drag the things around,
Mhm.
and then like one event listener on each individual card if you wanted to do like stuff within that card?
Yeah.
Like game or like.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So what I'm going to show you right now is like, what I'm going to show you is I'm going to break that rule for a second just because it's easier in this particular case. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to put one event listener on the entire container. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to figure out a way so that I can listen to clicks on the like button. So I can just listen to clicks on the like buttons on all of them, right? So I only have one event listener on the entire container, and I can just say, hey, like, was something clicked, right? Was the like button clicked, right? What's up?
Is there like a skip propagation? Is there a stop, like just skip this, that?
I don't know. Skip propagation. Propagation JS. How to ignore first event, skip to second. Maybe this is related. click function. No, they have stop.
Yeah, not like first, but like if you want.
Yeah, like skip a particular one.
Yeah.
I think instead you would just have to use if statements, which I'll show you in a second, which we're going to do. I don't think that there's one that just like skips this one, but let's take a look. So what's going to happen here is that like I'll leave this in here. I'm just going to comment this all out. Instead, what I'm going to do is like I have the container up here on line 22. I'm going to attach an event listener to the entire thing. Click function event. And I'm just going to console.log event.target. And actually, I'll also add console log liking, right? So ideally, I put on the entire container, which contains all of these tiles, right? Now, if I click the like button here, right, do you expect it to console log? Who thinks yes?
Well, I would say it's going to console log for the container. Like the fact you're just clicking in some random container.
Yeah, so it's going to console log there. What is the target going to be? The button. Good. If I click over here, what do you expect the target to be? That button. And so on and so forth. So the cool thing about this is that we can actually, all three buttons, there's only one event listener, but it triggers on all three buttons, which is super cool, right, so far. The problem with this, though, is that if I click over here, am I liking? Should I be liking? No. Will it console log, though? Yes, right? Which is not ideal, not what we want to be doing. So what we do now is what we call this, we're using propagation to our advantage, which is how we're triggering this event on the entire container. But we're actually just going to add really simple conditional logic and just use that to determine if I should trigger the functionality that I want. This is what we call event delegation, right? And so one thing that I have to find is I have to find something that is unique to the buttons and the buttons alone. So can anyone, like, just kind of looking at this, is there anything, just looking at these like buttons, is there something that they have in common that is unique to these buttons? The class, right? So I could just theoretically do something like this. Console.log, if event.target, how do we read the class from a DOM node? I'm sorry?
Oh, that's the
There's class list. What were you saying? There's class. It's not class actually. It's class. It's just class name. It's because class is a reserved word, right? So class name is what we use. So I can say if it equals like button, like this, because it's like space button, right? I will then console.log liking. Cool. I'm gonna get rid of this console log for a second. Sorry, I just want to move this up. Okay, so who thinks this will work? What does it mean to work? Good question. So what do you think? What does it mean to work in this particular case?
Print out liking unless it's the button.
Good, that's what I mean, right? It won't actually console log liking unless I specifically click a like button. That's the ideal circumstance. So let's test it. So if I click the like button, it should console log. If I click on this like button, it should also console log. And this one. If I click over here, will it console log? Or should it console log? No. And it doesn't. Cool? That is the basics of event delegation. You just find something really unique about the specific targets that you're looking for, something that's unique to them, and just use a really an if statement and just say if the target, look at the target and say check something about it, and if it meets a certain criteria, do some sort of activity. What's up?
In this, what you've just shown us allows us to then if we define other functions to do stuff depending on where you click or how you check out other things within the larger container that you're then listening to, you can make a lot of different buttons within that space for different things, right?
Yep. Yes, that's what we're going to build up to. So yes.
Okay.
It would just be more if statements, right?
Exactly. Right? The cool thing is it's one unified way to add activity to your web page. Is like you just add more if statements, right? So let's actually go through it like this, right? And let's just see. So so there you go. That's kind of cool, right? We can at least identify the target. Now the tricky thing is that like we also then need to increment this like button, this like thing, right? And we see here that it's a span over here, right? So the cool thing is that the event target is going to be unique to all three of these, right? And so the cool thing is that I could actually do something like this. Let me actually show you. Console.log. What if I console log event.target.parent? What do you think would happen? I should get the tile. Which tile? Which one? The button I clicks tile, right? So if I click like over here, what should I see console logged? Yeah, the Settlers of Catan tile, right? So if I click this, oh god. Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah, both work. I don't actually know what the difference is, to be honest. H4. Wait, what the heck? H4. Oh, what? Oh, it doesn't have a closing tag. God dang it, how'd that happen? Okay, that's why I was like, why are my like buttons weird? Okay, anyway. Okay, that's what I wanted, right? Okay. Actually, it's funny because Neeraj and I just had this problem earlier. Right. So there you go. Notice that this like button console logs its parent, right? If I click over here, what should it be? It should be the monopoly tile. Cool. This one, right? So the cool thing is like I have information that is like unique to this particular button. Every time I click on a button, I can use the target and then use relative like pathing to sort of figure out like which tile specifically I'm looking at. And now the cool thing from here is that I can then do this. Query selector. I like look at the target, look at its parent, and then from inside that parent, query select for a span. So if I click this like button, is that the right span? If I click this like button, is that the right span? Cool, right? Yes. I'm sorry. Yes, that's right. Good call. Right. So why is it brittle? You tell me.
What if you added in like a div on between this and the top, something like that?
Nice.
They was separated from one another.
So let's say for styling purposes, I add a div here around this button. Right, just like that. Oh, close it. Right. Will this work anymore?
Well, it'll work just not the way you want it to.
Yeah, kind of. What will a console log, do you think?
Oh, I'm just like,
Good. Because what this is going to look like is parent element is going to hit with what now? This div, right? And now query selecting from there is that it's just not going to find anything. So it's actually going to return null, right? So you're exactly right. This is still brittle, right? This isn't perfect. Because now the thing is like, if I use this whole parent element, I brought this up yesterday, right? If I like use the parent element, it's like if I change the order of my HTML, which you do very frequently, it's going to like break your code. Now, I'm going to show you something that's super cool that works really well. Actually, I'll just leave this in. So there is actually this special function. Instead of parent element here, I'm actually going to replace this with a function call to this function called closest. What this does is it will find the closest. It's like query selector, but in reverse. It uses the same syntax as query selector, but it will look upwards this time. So what I can say is like, I want you to find the closest thing with tile, with class name tile, right? Let's take a look at this code. Is it?
closest, you just mean lines in HTML.
No, it actually, it's by parent. So it will find, I think the best way to say this is like, closest looks up the DOM tree for the closest parent node with that matches the selector.
So, would it find a sibling?
No, only parents. Yeah, I think that's essentially what your question was, right? Yeah. So take a look at this, right? What you'll notice now is that this actually does work. There's the first span, there's the second span, here's a third, right? And the cool thing is that like this doesn't matter if I put another div here. Right? Cool, right? The idea here is that like it doesn't matter what the actual relationship of this parent of this button is to the target parent. It's just like I want to get all the way up here and then look for another span. The idea is that like closest allows you to skip past these and say like, oh, it doesn't matter how nested you are. I will just find the closest parent that matches that, right? Which is way more dynamic, right? I can restructure my HTML. I can add divs. I can put this button somewhere else, right? And as long as it's inside of tile, it will find the correct parent. What's up? What's up? You had a question.
I'm still not getting why that wouldn't stop at the second div.
So look at this query selector. What is this looking for?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. What's up? What's up?
Can you slow down a little?
Mhm.
Why, when you use closest, if you called closest without anything in params, or not, sorry, if you didn't have tile there,
Mhm.
it would just go to the closest parent, right? And it wouldn't hit the div.
I don't know actually. Let's see. Let's just not put anything in there. Yeah. This one actually tells you that it wants one argument. So this one actually has good error handling. But if I put in closest div, right? Well, I'll do this.
No, because you can't, there is no div above the span, right?
So if I click like, it's just that empty div that's around it, right? So this, it's like query selector, but literally in reverse. It uses the same arguments.
So you would use closest, you really use closest with query selector.
Yeah.
Right? Like they are used, as far as use case goes, they kind of are used together.
Yeah, because normally it's like I want to find the closest parent, and then I guess if you're looking for a sibling, that's really the only reason I need the query selector. I'll show you some instances where I just use closest, right? The reason for this is because like closest is kind of like query selector. It's like literally the same syntax. Like I'm looking for a dot tile, but rather than looking down the tree, it looks upwards. Does that make sense? Right? That's really what its functionality is for. I don't want to say that you always pair it with query selector because I'm going to show you a delete button and we're not going to use the query selector. I'm just going to use closest. Yeah, because you'll see in a second. Yeah. Does everybody see that, right? Like how this is potentially useful. It's dynamic. I can restructure my HTML, and as long as a button is some sort of descendant of tile, it will work. Yeah.
So can you just put the code back that we're dot?
Oh. Yeah.
Cool. So what if you had two spans? Would it go to the first one it hits after tile?
Yep.
So it would hit the one you're right now.
Yep. Right. So if you wanted to, like, you might have to get more specific, like add an ID or a class name to this, so that like equals counter like this, and then just do span dot counter, like that. Right. So then you just need to modify your HTML to make it more specific, right? Yes.
So the closest, the way he looks for that last name, he goes from his node to up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right.
If one of those, like the div class name is like tile,
Like this one.
yeah,
What do you think would happen?
will he find this instead of the parent?
That's right. That's exactly right. It finds the closest matching parent. Yes.
If you're using classes and IDs as ways to identify things to find using your closest and query selector, but you're also using them for like CSS, doesn't that kind of defeat separation of concerns?
Not exactly. Sort of like, so I think that this is okay. This is satisfactory because like, you might actually style this counter, right? And therefore it's like actually useful. It's like, oh, I use it for both JS and like, and that I think that's okay. I think if we know that consistently that our span is going to have a class of counter, like that's okay. But I think you are right, is that like ideally your IDs and classes should be just for CSS. We conveniently use JavaScript to sort of like say like, oh, okay, all of these spans are always going to have counter, and so we just like, but now their functionality is tied together. If I want to change this class name, I also have to change my JavaScript, right? And that's the point that you're trying to make, right?
Is there like an inline HTML option in the tags that is specifically just reserved for identification?
That's what dataset's for. So nice. Just hitting the next problem, right? So the idea here is that like basically the point that Wolf is trying to make is that like classes and IDs are really for CSS, and what we've done now is like, because now my code is tied to like, now both my HTML, my CSS, and my JavaScript are tied to there being a class of counter on the span. The tricky thing is that like, if for whatever reason I need to change this and like change the class name and be like, you know, like it's like, oh, whatever CSS, they decided to just call it count. Now my JavaScript, I then need to go and edit this to match. So my JavaScript and my CSS are now tied together. They're like the problem of, it becomes a problem of separation of concerns, is that like I can't freely change my CSS without also having to modify my HTML. And so, my JavaScript. And honestly, like in some ways that's acceptable to a certain point. But I think the idea is that like, would there be a way for us to sort of like, that is purely for JavaScript, for just pure data? And the answer to that is is actually to use what we call the data set. Which I will get to in a second, but I just want to make this work, right? What's up?
Okay, good.
You're good? Oh, okay.
That's what I see.
Okay. So everybody agrees at least that this works, right? Right. So I'm just gonna make this work real quick. I'm just gonna say like const span equals this, and then span dot, let's say like new count. Bless you. Equals span dot inner text, which would give me the number. I will parse int that to turn it into an integer, and then I'll just add 1 to it right away, right? And then I'll reset the span's inner text to be equal to the new count, right? Let's see. Oh god. I'm just going to get rid of this. And I can do that without breaking my code because of closest, right? Yeah. Works just fine. Sweet, right? Yeah. Is that a lot easier? You can imagine how you could use this potentially for delete, right? It's the same concept here, right? Cool. Any questions thus far on this? This is like one example of event delegation, right? We're going to do another one. But any questions on this example?
So in line 60, target is that specific tile.
Yeah, it's a specific tile. Or rather, it's not the specific tile. It's whatever is clicked on. So the reason this works is that, like, technically speaking, this console log's everywhere in the container. You see this console log that's outside of this statement. So if I look at that console log, it just will console log literally everywhere, right? But only the stuff in the if statement happens when only specific types of targets are clicked, like specifically the ones with class name like button. Ideally, there would be nothing else called like button on the page, right? Does that answer your question? Yeah, cool. What I'm going to do now is. Yeah, I can just rewrite it. Yeah, I guess sure. But it's like you should get rid of your console logs. Like, I mean, the problem is like if you leave them in there, it will console log like even in production. So like I've seen that actually. Like people just forget about console logs, and like a debugger is fine because I think debugger only works in development mode. But like console logs will still run. So I've seen stuff where like people. Yeah. It's actually kind of funny because like sometimes you'll just see on like random websites if you open the console, like developers just leave shit in there, like not on purpose, and there's just console logs in there. And just like sometimes it's on purpose, like you saw that New York Times one the other day that was just a big console log. But sometimes people just leave stuff in there and you're just like, I actually had a friend who was a coach here who works at Warby Parker. She said she left a console log in her code, and like it was on the website for like a week, and like nobody saw it until later. It was like, hey, like there's this weird console log. What's up with that? And so yeah, like it happens. But what I'd say is like like get rid of them eventually. What I noticed actually in Mod 5 is that like, and this drives me crazy, it's a huge pet peeve of mine, is that people just leave console logs everywhere and it becomes impossible to debug. I'm just like, okay, can you console log that? And then they're like, yeah, sure, they console log it. And then they show me their log and they have like 50 console logs. And I'm like, I don't know what I'm supposed to be looking at right now. So what I will say is that like, get in the habit of either commenting them out or just deleting them after you've debugged your thing. It actually just makes it faster than having to like, look through all your console logs. It's just a good coding habit, yeah. So what we're gonna do now, and this is I want to make into an exercise, is like I'm going to put like let's put it right here. I'm gonna put a button here. Just a really simple button. X. Do I have a delete CSS? I think I do. Close, okay. Class equals close. Cool, in the corner, right? Did I thought I had more. No? It's no red. Okay, whatever, still fine. So there you go, there's this close button. What I want you to do is like, and you can code this on the side, but like what I want you to do is think about how you could potentially use this same event listener to then now, when I click this button, delete the entire tile. Does that make sense? Yeah. So here, I'm going to move this up so that you can see both at the same time. Here's what the HTML looks like for every tile. Here is the event listener that already exists. I want you to figure out, like, with your partners, like, what you would need to add to make that work, to delete the right tile. Okay? So take like 5 minutes and chat. You can just group. Or, yeah, whatever. Scoot, dude.
I was thinking we just do almost exactly the same. Except that, It is loading for just doing it, but yeah, at this stage, and then you can see it.
Yeah. I'm saying, if for some reason, I've had it, that was the whole time, you can call the same thing, like pieces of breakfast, but I'm not just thinking, okay, by the table, like, in there.
We just made that out of the words. They're also going to this version. Actually, it's going to be another one because
Oh, I don't mean like another tile, like, I mean, like, that one, it was hard at the time.
There's no reason to call
No,
it.
I mean, else, if you
I think we got it.
instead of if, you're attaching this and that is listing for multiple things.
It's just much readable now.
Up here.
I think if you're
Oh, yeah, you can totally do that.
Because you're just gonna attach it to the.
No, you're right. You're actually right. Because it's like the
The rest of the thing was right.
not.
All the rest of this is fine, like, that's how I read it, that looks right to me, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, like. You can have it all, but yeah, one message. For the whole.
Give me a thumb when you're good. Give me a thumb when you're good. I saw 2 thumbs, 3 thumbs.
I'm not cutting this off. I need the space bar.
Okay, yeah, you can keep your thumb. All right, let's bring it. Let's bring it back. Let's roll it back. All right. Who thinks they have an answer? I think everybody has this. Yeah. So I'm gonna give it a shot.
Yeah. So we were saying that it would be in this, because I was going to make a whole new add event listener, and James is correct that because the add event listener is on the container itself, you can just add an else if. So conditional logic, like we're trying to do. So else if event.target.class name strict equals close, which is the class name of the little X thing, then you would say constant tile equals event.target.closest, and then you quotes dot tile, and then next line you just say tile.move, and that's it. Ooh.
Nice. Everybody come up with similar solutions, right? So again, kind of like I think Eugenia brought this up earlier. Is like do I need to combine it with query selector? No, not always. Right? It kind of depends what you want to do, right? But yeah, perfect. Nice. Very nice. Very nice. So it actually let me see console.log. What you'll notice is that the tile still exists. It's just not on the DOM, right? I could theoretically do this like, sorry. like that. Notice it just moves to the end. The idea, I don't know why you would do that, but the idea here is that like remove actually just removes it from the DOM tree, but it doesn't actually delete it. So all of the code, the HTML still exists. It's just like in memory somewhere. Yeah. Yes. Right.
Well, if
There's,
you refresh the page.
yeah. If you refresh the page, it's like it's back to where it was. Yeah. Right. Oh my god. Right. Actually, I think this is how carousels work, to be honest. I think so. Yeah. It just like it literally just removes it and puts it at the end. Right? Isn't that crazy? See, like, there's no such. Earlier I said I don't know why you'd want to do that, and then I was like, oh wait, actually, yeah. Like sometimes you just like I don't. It's sometimes code is weird, but like it actually does serve a purpose in certain circumstances, which is why usually I don't like to say like when students ask me like, do we never do that? I want to say like we don't usually do that, but there might be circumstances where you have that. And I can't imagine all circumstances, so like. You know, I would say like never say never as far as like code goes, because like
Never say never, Justin Bieber.
thanks. Is that cool with everybody? Is this okay? Yeah. Okay, so what I want to do right now is I want to take another 3-minute break. Good job, everybody. What we're gonna do next is we're gonna clean this up, and we're gonna like go as per Will's suggestion, is figure out a way so that we're not so closely tied to the class name, and that's gonna be the last 3 minutes. But do you want to take a break?
The slingshot health thing, so I have I'm drawing flat. It was a flat on
They're really nice.
Yeah, they actually are. Like really, like because they have the insulation thing.
Yeah, I'm actually surprised because like I put water in here at the beginning of the day and it's like cold still by the end of the day. It's like amazing.
It's kind of rocking. Like I had a beach day with it in the warm sand.
Mm-hmm. It's fine, right? Yeah.
It's shocking. It's like that shouldn't.
I do think this is probably like the best flattering swag.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I think change things is a close second.
Yeah, change things like that.
That's good.
That's Fuego.
A flat iron stickers on the flat iron water bottle.
You already see flat iron?
It does, but like, how could I possibly tell my fingers?
I have a dent on mine.
I do as well, like that cap dent.
Yeah.
But
Oh,
like,
wait, you have a cap dent too? Shit.
Yeah.
I thought that was just mine.
look, it's like probably.
Oh no, yours is a lot worse than mine.
Oh, nice.
No, mine's just like tiny.
Okay. Yeah, I got it.
I do think I need to add a sticker to it somewhere.
Yeah, because then it's like,
Where'd you get it?
They give it out at events sometimes.
sometimes.
I want a laptop sleeve.
I don't like the laptop sleeve. I think like that's kind of weird. Did you see it? Yeah, it's like not my thing. I mean, like it's like the color of the slashes, but it's like even lighter almost. It's like I would prefer if it was that color, but it's actually lighter than that. Which is just like
I would prefer things.
I mean, swag is always swag is swag. I mean,
Swag is swag.
I'm not gonna
Reading out myself.
Do you have the shirt? Oh, you're not wearing it. Oh shit. Nice. Yeah, one person missing. Oh wait.
We looked best on here. But then tomorrow.
You can put it on the other side horizontal. I'm sorry, vertical. It's redundant.
Double up. Double up. Yeah, that's that's what you really want.
The tagline of Flat Iron School is Flat Iron School. Okie dokie. Since we're all back, let's just finish up with talking a little bit about what dataset is. So we've kind of looked at all three of these things, right? We've talked about event propagation, we've used conditional logic, and we've also sort of talked about like now how like using that all together. Now the last thing we have to talk about is the dataset. This is a very useful and pretty versatile thing. I'm just going to show you really the basics of it right now. Just one example, but there are many examples. Now to use the dataset, what you'll notice is that like if I console.log event.target, and this isn't just target, it's just like any DOM node, right? So I'm just using target here because it's convenient for me. Console.durit instead. I want to look at its attributes. So like, let's click this button. There's this thing called dataset here, which points to, what is that right there? Yeah, it's an object, right? Notice right now it's empty, right? I'm going to just console log event.target.dataset. Now basically like this like button has one. Everything technically has a dataset. Every DOM node has a dataset, right? If I click anywhere, right, the dataset of that particular DOM node will be console logged. And that's actually, again, that's happening because I have the event listener in the entire container, right? So technically every DOM node can have a dataset. Now, if I actually want to put values in this, the way to do so is pretty straightforward. So let's just say that on this button, I also put in something like data-beef steak, right? Take a look at that. Data-beef equals steak. So just digest that for a second. That wasn't a joke, but okay. So if I click this, like the image, there's nothing in there, right? There's nothing in here. But if I click this like button, what do you notice? Yeah, beef and steak. So what is, if you were to infer, what is the relationship between how does this work? Does someone want to explain that? Yes?
Data is it's creating a pair.
Mhm.
Beef is the key, and steak is the value.
Perfect. That's exactly it. That's really all it is, right? Anytime I write anything here, sup, I can even put in like 2, I don't know what the heck, right? Right, there you go. And the rules are really simple for dataset. You can actually attach as many of these as we want. Data-beef equals steak. And if I click on this, it'll just have both keys. Cool, right? So the nice thing about dataset that's the thing that's cool about it is that like it has nothing to do with like HTML or CSS. It's actually not used by anything at all, right? What it's for is really for us as JavaScript developers to do stuff with. Basically, it's like what we call a flag. It has like information or just like information about that particular thing, right? So the way that we can use this is there's actually a number of ways. I'm going to show you a really simple way first. Right now, our if statements really depend very heavily on the class name. But again, I don't think that this is really the best idea. Ideally, it would be something it should depend on something that is JavaScript only, right? And so this is a pattern that like I created. It's like really basic. It's just like data dash action equals like, right? And the idea is that all of the buttons have a data action like. And what I can do now is I can do something like this. Instead of using the target's class name, what can I use?
And then you do add a key of action, like
And then,
equals like.
yeah, just like this there. Right? That's it. Works just fine. Cool. Right? I still have this sub in here with that. I didn't even realize it was there. Does everybody see that, right? So now I don't depend on the class name anymore. I have something that is unique to this button that has nothing to do with the CSS IDs or the CSS like classes. It's just like totally independent. What's up?
So is action like a method like value, or is it actually what you're like if you change data, is that what you're calling it down there, or is it always action?
No, it doesn't matter. I just use the word action because like that's what I use the word action because like it's describing what's supposed to happen. It's like what do I do, right?
Is that standard for like?
Yeah, I've actually seen that in places. Like you'll see like data dash action on some things. Like it's like, oh, data dash action is like dialogue or something like that. So you'll see stuff like that. But yeah, I mean like it could be whatever you want, right?
Just making sure it wasn't like a random center and just
No. The only part that is a keyword is data dash. That's the only part that is like you must do, right?
Did we see the?
How many
You want to see the page again? Yeah. What about it?
Where did you get sub from?
Well, it's not there anymore. Oh wait, I thought I deleted it. Oh, I didn't save. Sorry. Yeah, it's not supposed to be there. That was an example from when I was trying to target spams. Yeah, that's not supposed to be there. Tanya, you got a question? So how do I access the dataset from the console? I need access to, as long as I have a DOM node, I can actually, as long as I have a DOM node, I can like access the dataset. So that can come in any way. Like right now, I'm using the target because the target is a DOM node, but I could like query select that query selector button. Like this, like this, right? And then I can do that data set on this. That also works, right? As long as you have a DOM node, it doesn't matter how you got it. As long as you have a DOM node, you can look at DOM data set. I just have convenient access to it here because it's the target. Yeah. Console.dir. So you notice that like console.log. If I console.log. Yeah, it just prints like this thing, which is not really useful for me, right? If I wanted to, this is really an object, but like the browser is showing it to me in this like nice little format. But if I actually just want to see what its key value pairs are, you can console.dir instead, which just turns into an object.
You know what dir stands for?
I think directory. Yeah. Does that make sense? Right? It's just like I don't like this isn't useful to me. I actually wanted to see all the attributes on the object, so I just console.dir it instead. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Okay. It's just a different way to kind of view it, and it's really just because the browser doesn't really do a good job. Well, it's actually doing too much here. It's like, oh, you probably wanted this really nice looking thing over here, but it's like, nah, I wanted to see the data. Like, I wanted to see what's in there, right? So you can just use console.dir for that.
And those are just using all of the attributes of that button template.
Yeah, it basically removes all the prettying it does to make this look nice. and actually just says like, oh, just print it like it's a normal object, right? They're just key value pairs. There's a bunch of console things, like there's console.warn. Yeah, that's how you get that. I think there's console.error. Yeah. Yeah.
I think there's also a .message.
Yeah,
Set it up on the thing and there's something.
oh, look at this. Assert. There's a list of them.
Oh,
Memory. I don't know what all these do. I don't know. Message. There's no message. What is console.time?
So anytime you want to call on, anytime you want to put out a warn for an error, you have to console. Weird.
Yeah. If you can also throw errors. So like through. That actually throws an error, right? And you can do something like this, like. See that? So you can actually throw your own errors if you'd like. But if you just like want to do something for yourself, you can just console.warn.
And when and how would you utilize the warning thing that comes out, pops out?
Oh, alert.
alert.
That's different. That's actually not log. That's actually just its own thing.
That's what I was thinking.
That's that. Right, that's entirely different from console.log, right? But yeah, you could use that for anything.
I thought that was a console.
Yeah. So like I could do this, like. Bless you. Cool. So with that in mind, just going back to this whole dataset action thing, right? If I wanted to change this event.target.class name thing for delete button, I could do something really similar. Instead of data-action like, same thing, but this one's delete. And change this. Works just fine. Cool, right? Yeah. Nice. So other things that you can do, as we're going to see later, is that like eventually, like for instance, when I click this button, I'm also going to eventually send. Let's say I wanted to persist these changes, which we will do tomorrow. That's kind of a preview. But like in order to run a fetch, like how do we normally update something in the backend in Rails? You save it, but like let's think routes. Which of our 7 RESTful routes is good for updating a particular resource? An update route, which is what type of request? It's a patch, and what is the URL? So it's like, let's say we're doing dogs.
ID edit.
No, that's for the show page. I'm sorry?
/dogs.
Yeah, it's not slash dogs.
Oh, patch to the ID.
Yeah.
Patch of dog's ID.
That look familiar?
Yeah.
Right? So the idea is that like eventually if I'm clicking like, I should be incrementing likes in the backend somewhere, right? That's what we're gonna be doing tomorrow. So the idea is like, where the heck do I get the ID from? Right? Like where does that come from? You could do something like this. So notice there's an ID here. So when I click on the button, I have direct access to the ID, right? There's a number of uses for this. Here are 2.
Because it's a key value pair on HTML. It's like it's translates so perfectly to that and stuff.
That's right.
It's like,
Yeah.
I have a question regarding target values.
Mm-hmm.
If using forms and stuff like that. Is there any better way of getting a specific,
Input.
rather than just indexing it?
Yeah, I guess I'll show you that. I have time anyway. I'm basically done with all the content. Before I get to that, does anybody have any questions about this? I will do that if you're curious. But like, does anybody have any questions?
I had a question that's kind of unrelated.
Okay, well, I'll do this first then.
Yeah.
So if you have no questions about dataset, then I will do this, which is not related to any of this. So just kind of as an example, I'm just going to spin up like a random form. It doesn't matter. I'm just going to put a form here. Boom. So what am I doing? Ugh, I'm not going to use that. I'll put an ID on it, like, let's say this like new, new game form like this, and I'll put an input. Let's put 3 of these. What is it? What did I have on this? I had name, description, and image URL. So that, and then I'll put input type submit. Cool, right? Just put it above. Oh, ooh. Yeah, here, yeah. There you go, right? There's my new form. Now, the idea is that, like, I'm sure you guys had to capture inputs for the task lister, right? You're worrying about capture inputs. So I'm going to show you this right now. So document.querySelector, was it new game form? And then I'm going to add an event listener to this, right? How many of you put clicks on your submit button? Or did everyone use the submit event handler? Yeah, yes. I'm going to use the submit event handler, right? And I think I mentioned kind of briefly yesterday, like, why I use submit. Does anybody remember what that was, what the reason was? Yeah, right. It's just like more dynamic, right? So rather than just having to click make game, I can also on the last input hit enter and it should submit, right? Which is how a lot of forms work. But there is a problem. Who ran into the problem with the refreshing of the page? What did you do to fix it?
Use, what's it called? Prevent default.
Nice. Right. Does anybody know why it refreshes the page when you submit? Like if I do this, like I'll just show you. Does anybody know why it refreshes? Yeah. The default behavior of all forms is to submit a post request, right? Which we don't really want anymore, so we're just going to prevent default here. And that will prevent the default behavior. Just won't. Oh, what?
Isn't it the ID?
Oh God, yes, thank you. That's why I was like, wait, what? Nice, good catch. Cool, right? So great, that's what prevent default does. Now, you could basically, if you were trying to get these inputs, I think what did people do to get these inputs? You what? Indexed. Oh, okay, yeah. There's a couple ways. Like forms have a few funny things. Like, for instance, event.target gives you the form itself, and there's like some weird things where you can do this. Right? So it's like name. Oops. It looks like weird as hell. I really don't like this, but I'll just show it to you and just. But it's kind of gross. Description. Nice. But let me show you that this does work, right? See that? It does work, and I can read the value from there as just like dot value on each of these, just like that. And so I can read the values this way of my form. But like now, again, I don't want to be tied too much to the HTML. This relies on my inputs being in exactly this order to work, right? Which is not great, again. So the idea is like, can we make this more dynamic? And the answer is yes. I think, Wilf, you just said it. What was it? Yeah. So each of these, this is what the name attribute actually does. So if I call this one's name, this one's description, and this one is image URL, right? So I put a name attribute on all three. The cool thing is that, oh God, what did I just do? Okay. The cool thing is that like, there's a special behavior with names where like, if a parent has a, like event.target is the form, if a parent has a child with that name, you can actually just do this. Oh god, I forgot target. Right. See that? These must match exactly the name that you give them, right? But the idea is like this makes it a lot easier.
Would the name attribute of the form create a key in the DOM node?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Cool, right? It's a lot easier. Now you can just move your inputs around, don't matter, right? I think you can also nest them and it still will work. So if like, for instance, I put like a div here, I think this will still work. Yep. So it doesn't, this also goes around nesting too, because it's just gonna look for any descendant with that name, right? So that's how I do inputs, actually. The code?
You said.
I'm sorry, say that one more time.
Oh, I see what you're doing. That's a key. So that's an attribute to your calling.
Yeah.
That's what you meant. You said that has to match up exactly.
Yes. This whatever event.target and then whatever, it has to match whatever name I give it. So if this is beef, this has to be beef. Easy peasy. Beefy. Easy peasy beefy. Okay. Okay. That's kind of it. Does anybody have any questions?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I had one thing, which was so how like propagation bubbling kind of works? Is there like, because we were talking about how you would have it kind of like if you had an event listener on the whole page, then if you clicked anything that had like a nested event listener lower down on the DOM tree, then it would trigger the higher one. So is there a way that you could have it so like you could do because there's the method like stop propagation or something. Is there a way to do that in reverse so that it would only happen as like the only event listener or something?
As the only event listener? So basically to not go downwards?
Right, yeah.
I see. So like, let's say that you're saying like, if I had an event listener on the entire container, but I don't want it to trigger anywhere below.
Right, so if you click anywhere except where there is an event listener otherwise or something.
Ooh, no. Actually, that's a really interesting problem. That is actually a difficult thing. So basically, like, the best example of what you're talking about is like, do you know what a modal is?
No.
So like, bootstrap, let's look at this. So modal is actually like, see that? That's a modal. It's like this thing right here. Everything grays out and then like the modal appears, right? That's called a modal, right? Basically what you're saying is like, how do you get the functionality that when you click anywhere outside of this, it closes, right? That's kind of what you're going for.
Exactly.
That's actually, it's funny because I actually had this conversation with another person and like, it's actually a difficult problem.
Really?
The idea would be that like, really what you would do is like, you would put an event listener, what is actually happening here is that over the entire screen is actually added a big div that actually is just opaque and gray. That's what actually this grayness is. And the idea is that you put an event listener on this thing, and then you put the on-click to close it inside of there. And then what you do is you use event delegation to ignore that box. Yeah.
It could be used for that too. You know how when you have an ad blocker and you go on like a news site, you would just go and find the modal and delete it and continue using it?
Yes, you can. Sometimes sites protect against that. Like there are protections against it. I don't actually know how they do it, but like there are some things where like they don't even load the code. Some sites are really bad at this. Actually, it's really funny because like we work at the IPO and stuff like this. Like Business Insider had like this like article that all of us wanted to read, but we couldn't because there's a paywall. Right. And the problem is like even if you delete the modal, the text isn't there. But they actually it's just not on the page and you can't find it, or it is there, but it's like the modal isn't covering it. It's just like hidden. And so what we did was we actually like looked in the HTML for it and then just query selected and got the inner text and you just see the entire article. Yeah, it's just as like a big blob of text in your console. So we were actually all just reading the article from our console. It was crazy. But yeah, you can totally do stuff like that. It's kind of funny. Yeah. Yeah. There's JavaScript is used for a whole bunch of things. Like there was this training that we had to do, like is like anti-bribery training that we have to do, and it has this really annoying thing. Like it's just standard like corporate stuff. When you click like the next button on the thing doesn't appear until you like click on a whole bunch of other things and like stuff like this and answer questions. And like I was just like, man, I don't want to get through this. So I found the button and then it was disabled, so I enabled it and then I clicked it. So I wrote like a script to do that, and I just called it next, and I would just type in next. I would just invoke next, and it would just go to the next slide. So like you can mess around as much as you'd like. And I actually honestly suggest that you do. It's like the way really that you learn JavaScript is really by just playing with it. It's not like that serious of a language. It's meant to be kind of fun. It's why I actually think it's like my favorite language, is because you can just mess around so much. So yeah, great questions. Yeah. Anybody else? Any other questions? Anything from today? Data set? Any of this stuff? Cool. So what you're gonna do is like you're gonna get a pairing lab. That we'll release it like now, but it's like almost lunch, so go take your break. The pairs you got yesterday will actually be for this. So do you still have access to that link? It's probably somewhere in your Slack, right? You guys got pairs yesterday, is my understanding? Yeah, it's the same pairs, right? So just use those. It's probably just like look up in your Slack, it's somewhere there, or I can just have them send it out again. What? Oh, they deleted it.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. It's fine. I'll just have them send it out again. So you're gonna pair on something. It's this thing called the DOM challenge. You can make use of all of this stuff that you've learned thus far, but the idea is to focus on just DOM manipulation, right? Just like DOM manipulation and event handling. Cool. So by tomorrow, we will actually start looking at fetching, and then that's actually all the content for the code challenge. That's it. Friday's lectures on Rails API, and that's really more, it's like how to use Rails as an API, but it's really more like conceptual, like how do we get a front end to talk to a back end? Like what does that look like? But really tomorrow's, you won't actually have to write Rails in your code challenge, so don't worry about that. You should still pay attention on Friday's lecture, but tomorrow's lecture is the last substantive bit that will be on your code challenge. We will release a whole bunch of practice code challenges, like a few on the weekend. Monday we will practice, Tuesday we will practice and have a review, and then Wednesday's your code challenge. Cool? Cool, great. Go, take a break, lunch starts.